This is where this is the part where I need to think, and you have to cut things off and let me think, I suppose.
I would like to have this part.
So today we're having a conversation with Sumithra, who is also my professor. In fact, my favorite professor, to be honest. And we're speaking about how a teacher's idea of an ideal student may sometimes come in the way of a teacher-student relationship. I'm not disappointed, but it's quite a shame we missed that because it was flowing really
Don't
well.
worry, I can. No, that's.
Okay, we will. I'll still come back to it because I think it's part of what really interests me.
The teaching learning hackathon. I mean, so I'm happy to talk about it again if you want.
Yeah, let's go. I really want to capture that.
Okay. No, so the teaching learning hackathon that I was just part of.
Yeah.
Sorry, I saw your eyes going there. Okay, we can do this again, right? No, so I was saying that usually hackathons in, I think, software spaces and so on, when groups of, I guess, software programmers get together and they're given a problem,
right,
and they have to figure out a solution to it in some amount of time, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually a day or something like that, and they work all night.
Yeah.
So the Teaching Learning Resource Center that actually ran this hackathon, they took that idea, that format, but the way they conceptualized it is they decided that they would pose problems in the higher education space, and then have teams of teachers, just figure out solutions to some problem that they identified. It was fairly flexible. So they had a bunch of themes. They had 5 themes, and then your team could pick whichever theme you were interested in, and either come up with a model or a framework or some learning resources or something. So the team that I was part of had 2 other faculty members. So I teach physics and mathematics. The other 2 team members, one of them taught teaches international relations, and the other teaches biology and theatre. So we picked using games for teaching, learning, and evaluation.
All right.
So that was a theme, and we just designed a role play based simulation game, in which you could have students from different courses, which means that what they are learning is from very different disciplines, but coming together to play the single game, right? And each contribute to different aspects of the game, but then everything comes together. And so I guess while simulation games are used in a lot of disciplines, the novel idea there is how can you use that to achieve learning outcomes in different disciplines. Anyway, so that's what we worked on.
Is it the similar concept as biomimicry? Biomimicry. So biomimicry is a really interesting concept where researchers and engineers and all people from different disciplines come together to develop a solution based on what the way the nature looks like.
So that's a specific thing, right? That you see something in the natural world. So for example, the classic example when you talk about biomimicry is Velcro, right? Velcro in shoes or something. I think geckos' feet have these. So, but that's a very specific idea that you take something from biology, from the natural world, and then you see how something with that functionality can be designed, right? And made into a device or product or something. This had nothing to do with anything like that. It's if you play a game, a strategy-based game in which a bunch of people come together and there are some rules, and you have to figure out a way for the game to move forward, right? So this game was designed around just the pandemic, right? So for example, the political science students would form the government machinery that has to deal with the pandemic, right? So each of the game's players take on a role in government, and then you have a group from the health sciences who would take on the medical experts' roles. And you have a group of people, maybe they are the math and stats students who take on the data analysis work. So we pick an idea that is currently relevant to students, which is the pandemic. And each of them takes on a role as a game character. But they're given prompts, and they have to the rules of the game are such that one of them generates something that then moves play by forwarding that to the next team, and then they take it on from there and so on.
Yeah.
So it's just a role play based game. That's it.
I mean, okay, very interesting. So, and I think I really just want to pull out from that. I mean, to stick to that for a while.
Yeah.
Hackathons in general, I have participated in one before in 2015, and you're given a problem, and maybe let's say Amazon comes up with a new cloud service, and they invite a bunch of engineers to build on top of that, to build products on top of that. And so at the end of the day, there's a product maybe that you demonstrate, and then you judge based on your technical expertise and how you leverage or use AWS or whatever they come up with.
Right.
So how is evaluation happening in such competitions?
They had so I'm trying to think of. They shared the rubric with us, right?
Yeah.
And for the life of me, I can't think of the specific elements on the rubric. But the idea was whether, so for at least what we had identified, so you had to first identify the problem itself, right? Unlike in other hackathons where you're given the problem.
Yeah.
Right? So one was for the identification of a bunch of problems in this space, and then narrowing down on one problem that could be addressed. Right?
Okay.
And then the specificity of the solution to this problem that you've identified, right? And the rationale you provide for it.
Yeah.
And then you actually had to design the learning activities, right? So they had some metric for looking at what the learning activities are and whether they were feasible.
Yeah.
Right? So you could always come up with things, but are they feasible in the higher education space? I think these were some of the things that we were evaluated on.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And so how is that solution or whatever your solution that you designed with the team? How can you apply? Is that applicable in the classroom environment?
We think it should be.
Okay.
So, for example, in fact, we were thinking that next semester we have a bunch of these courses. Can you actually try it out? Right?
Okay.
It's not that novel, or nor is it that difficult to implement.
Yeah.
The only constraints with solutions like these, where multiple courses come together, are simply things like time and teachers losing a little bit of autonomy, because suppose something that's happening in my course has to sort of align with something happening in another course. Things are quite, it's fixed, right? It's quite rigid,
exactly,
and you have very little room to maneuver.
Yeah.
But apart from that, these things are easily doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this specific theme for the game. Right?
Yeah.
The idea is that you just pick something of contemporary relevance that 2 or 3 disciplines can all identify with and have something to contribute in thinking about.
Yeah.
And then the 3 teachers from the 3 disciplines have a way of collaborating and thinking about how you could have a similar role play based game, where the theme is of course suited to whatever they are teaching in that course.
Yeah. I think that really speaks to one of the few things that me and my friends are always, actually my partners as well, we're always ideating is, how can we imbibe this idea of creative and creative problem solving that is inclusive of all students, and taking the problem from a current real world problem. So, like, let's say I'm a pole science student.
Right.
How do I deal with the current issues of climate change? And so it's direct application of a solution that I'm learning in a classroom.
Right.
With what is happening currently, and so that becomes really relevant to transition from a student life. I'm really interested in doing that into a professional life.
Right.
And I think that is predominantly one of the biggest challenges that we have as students, because I'm still your student either.
No, but I get that.
Yeah. So I think as a student, and speaking, out of my experience currently, speaking to most of the my batchmates who are passing out of college, most of them have no idea what they want to do. I mean, they're confused now because either I go for higher education or I start looking for an internship, or maybe and most of them, I go and work in an NGO and try to really figure out what I do or what I want to do. And I think the teacher plays a very significant role in that transition.
Yeah.
And I want to know, what have you been doing? I mean, do you have any specific ways in which you interact with students, especially in that transition and developing that professional mentality, or that, to segue from being a student, you're supposed to be leaving this place.
Yeah.
What is your plan? So tell me, what is your moves on that?
No, so one is, I mean, you said it's a struggle for students to make that connect, right?
Yeah.
At least for me, and I think it's probably the case for other teachers as well. The struggle to, bring that connection into the classroom is also real, right?
It's quite hard to do that
because there's all of this domain knowledge. I mean, and depending on what discipline you're from, right, it's easier or harder, right? So there is some specific content that you need to teach, and you need students to engage with. But at the same time, there are all of these other things, right? So you want to give people an experience of a real world problem. Right. And I think that's something that I probably haven't done very well in classrooms yet. But one, at least in the science classroom, one thing I have realized is that the entire course need not be about giving a real world experience.
Yes,
right?
that is true.
Perhaps it could be just one aspect of what the course is about, or one activity or one assignment that tries to do this. Right? So it could be that it's the students are thinking about a problem and coming up with their own activities to conduct, or something like that, right? So what I was getting at is that it may not always be possible to think about how to integrate real world ideas into every aspect of your course, but I guess one way to do that is identify specific content or specific parts of the course that may lend itself to some amount of this kind of activity.
Exactly. And I think that really speaks to classroom connection is key.
Okay.
I mean, I personally, and many people have told me, I have always been a tough student to teach. And I think it's a question that I really wanted to understand, because I've been in your class, and I want to know, how do you deal with multicultural classrooms? Because I think that addresses to that, because having that connection, it really, a teacher has to do a lot to be able to deal with kids with different ideologies, from different countries, especially SSLA. It's a very colorful space. So how do you deal with such spaces with students who have a lot of, come from very, very multicultural spaces?
So, and that doesn't happen always as well, right? So, but whenever, I think the thing to identify is, everybody has something that they find interesting, or something that they like to talk about. So I think, at least so far, it's been about identifying that one thing to have a conversation with the other person about. And I think, so maybe it's just been about creating an atmosphere that's just comfortable for the student to be able to speak in, right? Like speak up in. Maybe that's the that's the thing I can think about right away.
And I think it is true. And speaking from a student perspective, obviously, I remember once when I was in your class, right? The first class we had, it was I think mathematics. It was a
so it was a core course, which meant your entire cohort was taking the course. It was 120 strong or something. And it was quantitative reasoning.
And I remember I was sitting at the back of the classroom. I was with my computer doing something. And I was not paying attention at all. I remember you came to me and was like, what are you up to? I was like, I'm doing some work. Like, okay. And I remember what you did. You just left. You're like, okay.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, I mean, there is no need to sort of, I guess, call you out and say, because clearly if you wanted to, be doing something else and not this, then maybe it's okay to,
And I think why I ended up listening to the rest, or paying attention in the rest of the semester, probably not the rest of it because I'm not sure I did attend. I mean, my record is not clear. Okay. I'm not gonna show. But the reason why I attended that class and I paid attention all the way to the end is because you dealt with me the way I would expect someone from a senior position to deal with me culturally, like from where I come from.
Okay.
I think we're not very used to being told what to do. Like, once you're at a certain age, especially post 17, 18 years old, you think, okay, I think I can make my own decision moving on.
Yeah.
And anyone telling me what to do is clearly not acknowledging the fact that I am reasonable, I'm rational enough.
Sure.
And I think that part, I think the way you did it, and I mean, obviously you do have a very international and multicultural experience where you studied abroad, and I will come back to that. I'll come to that. But I think that is key why I developed that connection, and I remembered you throughout till now, and also inclusive of your good teaching skills. So now coming back to you.
But can I just say?
Yeah, shoot.
So one, thank you for telling me that, because I didn't know this.
Yeah.
Right? And it's good to have that sort of feedback from students. I think that's the nice thing about teaching, right?
Yeah.
With anything that you do, you improve or you feel a little more confident about what you do when you get feedback, right? Needed feedback.
Yeah.
And with teaching, that happens, right? So in the classroom, and that's what I miss in the online space, right? In the classroom, when you're walking around or when you see people or they say something that may not be connected to the lesson, but there's always constant feedback, and that's very useful to have as a teacher.
Exactly.
But thank you for telling me that. Okay.
So I was going through your dissertation, and I think it's always one of the most interesting thing I always want to come back to. Because you speak of this very interesting person called Daisy. Daisy, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Daisy, I'm sure I'm also not pronouncing it right, but Daisy Jenny was my PhD advisor.
Yeah, and you speak of how he is a really good educator, and you aspire to be like him. So I really want to know, what is it about Daisy that makes you really remember him?
So I think, one, the fact that you read my dissertation, after I submitted the dissertation and graduated, I've never read it. So to have somebody else read it is something.
Okay.
So Deji definitely is not the only teacher that I want to be like.
Sure.
But there are qualities, there are specific qualities maybe that I picked from Deji, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I don't think we have, or rather, if I think back, it's not a singular role model, right?
Sure.
So there's not just one person, and
sure.
Yes, influences are many, right? You watch people and you learn many things from them.
Yeah.
Both what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
True.
In Deji's case, I think, it just absolute clarity, right? So ultimately you're teaching some specific content, right? And in his case, there was just, when he taught, there was just absolute clarity, and he I think taught in a way that allowed students to develop that clarity as well, right? And so the fuzziness sort of goes away, and when you're studying something and there is, and somebody takes you towards clarity,
there's that,
and that I found to be something that I hoped I would have as a teacher.
Lovely.
Right? That just taking people towards clarity and being precise, and so it was in a very specific way that I thought Deji was a very effective teacher.
Did you always want to be a teacher, or where did this where did this start from?
Yeah, so I think I've always done some teaching in some form. Even as a student, I think I would teach friends.
Yeah.
And but I don't think it was, I thought of it as it wasn't that I said, okay, I'm going to be a teacher and let me figure out all of the things that I need to do to become a teacher.
Sure.
It just wasn't that, right? So I think I had, like all kids, I think I had changing goals at various points of time.
Yeah.
And at every point, I think I just looked at what was it that I enjoyed studying at that point. And if there were multiple things, I just picked the one that, so for example, in class 12, I had a fantastic physics teacher.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed other subjects, right? I enjoyed, for example, literature. I really enjoyed it. But, there was a choice and I just picked one, right?
Yeah.
And so I picked physics and then went on to continue to study physics. I didn't know what research was till I think I finished masters or something. And then I had some summer research experience, and I felt like, okay, maybe this is something I should try. Right?
Yeah.
And then through graduate school, the good thing that happened was I had a lot of opportunities to teach as a teaching intern. Not teaching intern, that's what we call teaching assistant at SSLA. The teaching assistant, right? So I was a teaching assistant and then I got to teach my own course and so on. But teaching was something I got a lot of feedback on through these experiences.
Yeah.
Right? And I could put myself in settings, in classroom settings, and see that I really enjoy being in a classroom. I love talking to people.
Yeah.
I like it when students and I together figure something out, like something clicks, right? So I just enjoyed that, and I got feedback that this was something that I was sort of good at.
Sure.
And then after you do a PhD, you decide whether you want a research heavy job or a teaching heavy job.
Sure.
And I chose to teach in a liberal arts college. Right after that. So I think it's sort of, with time made itself. But when you think back, so when I think back now, I've always had opportunities to teach in some way or another.
Sure.
And also got lots of feedback about it. So it makes you a little more confident, I guess, in your choice of profession when you have that kind of feedback over an extended period of time. Yeah.
I think feedback is one of the most interesting. In fact, it is very core to what we are doing at Skizaa, because what we are doing is we're finding ways in which we can triangulate the feedback loop between the parents, teachers, and students, especially in the global south. We've been speaking to a bunch of really interesting teachers back in Africa, especially in Kenya. And most of them have said, we do try to communicate with students, but we do not get the right type of feedback that we want. And two, with parents, it's really difficult to get feedback, especially when it comes to modeling the behavior of the student or, encouraging, academics post, the school environment. How do you deal with feedback with students? How do you create an atmosphere where the feedback loop is really efficient?
So let me ask you something. So when the teachers tell you that they don't get a feedback, they mean that when they are teaching, they feel that the students are not talking back to them in ways that they would get feedback.
Sure.
So is that what they meant?
That's pretty much of the classroom engagement. What they've said, and it's very interesting. And it's very much linked to culture. It is the culture of saying the right thing. How was the class? Very good, mom. We enjoyed. Did you understand? Yes. But but they don't really tell you. It's the yes. It's a very cultural thing. Saying the right thing to the figureheads. And so, how do you manage to really establish that balance with students and get feedback that builds you as a teacher professionally?
Okay, so I don't know if I've managed to do that, but at least let me try and address what you said, right?
Yeah.
So what you said about it being, a lot of it being cultural is true, right?
Yeah.
So this may not be true of all classrooms and all spaces, but at least in India it is true that there is a lot of reverence for the teacher.
Yes.
Right? And respect, of course, everybody needs to respect each
other. Absolutely.
But there's a little more than that. So, for example, so I've been in a workshop with teachers from across the country, and we were being trained in new ways to teach science, or thinking about how to teach science. Anyway, that was the setting.
Yeah.
And one of the activities the organizers had for us at some point was very simple. So they had a chart or something with I think the heading was, it was just an ideal student. So you had to identify characteristics of an ideal student. So according to you, who is an ideal student?
Yes.
Everybody came up with, so there are 100 teachers and you have 100 lists, right?
Yeah.
And then people were collating everything that the teachers had written down. Okay, so there were many interesting things, but something that kept coming up over and over again is teachers saying that an ideal student should be respectful, yes, but an ideal student should be obedient. Okay, and that word, if you think about it, comes with a lot of so that tells you something about the dynamic in the classroom, or the expected dynamic in the classroom.
Yes.
Right? That you have this authority figure. I mean, I guess teachers are authority figures, but there is a hierarchy that you establish, and any things that you say not to be questioned. Right?
Yes.
So the obedience has all of these connotations that come with it.
Exactly.
And that becomes very hard in a classroom if you want your students to develop abilities to think critically, question what they're learning.
Exactly.
So in a very limited setting, so what I'm familiar with is the science classroom.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of education, conversations around science education are about how do you create activities, or how do you make your lessons inquiry based, right? So you don't study science as a product, like you're not just given some facts and you take it for granted that these are how things are and just study them, but you learn the process of science, right? How do you figure out, how do you come up with an explanation, right? How do you go from posing a problem, a well-posed problem, to figuring out an explanation for why something, how something works.
Exactly.
Right? But to do that, you need to be able to allow your students, or students should feel comfortable with asking open-ended questions, with trying things and things not working out. And as a teacher, I should be comfortable with sometimes not knowing the answer myself, because these questions are being posed at the moment.
Yes.
Right? And so at some point you have to see it as a co-constructed thing, right?
Yes.
And this notion of a student having to be obedient comes in the way of creating an experience like that.
Very true.
So that's important to break. And it's also just, for everybody involved, it's just a lot more fun and a lot more valuable when that sort of an imposition is not there, right? So at least I try my best to not make it about me telling them something and them having to just listen to it all and not ask anything back. Yeah, so that could be that's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Right? And so, well, you have experiences that you talked about from Kenya.
Yeah.
I was a student in India. So at least till my master's. And then when I was doing a PhD at Penn State, I was a teaching assistant in a large state university where there were students from from other parts of the world and from the US as well. There was a group, right? And there was a difference, at least for me, right? That was the first time that you had a group of students who this particular thing was not holding them back. This idea of the teacher as somebody whom you should look up to and not question.
Exactly.
And that made a difference, right? It makes a difference to how a student feels in the classroom, the comfort they have to ask questions, to think for themselves, to be also just be more confident people.
Yes, exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So I think at least the teachers you spoke to seem to have identified a really important? I don't know, did they identify it? Did they say that's why they're not getting feedback?
No, actually they didn't.
They didn't say that?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
And this is quite a revelation, because if I was to go back in the same class set up back in Kenya, and someone asks me for feedback, I will say it's very good. I don't think I will. I'll say I understood, sir. I understood now. You know.
Yeah.
And I think this really spins a lot on the upbringing that we have, and it's very culturally rooted, because obedience and I think it's very politically incorrect to just pull this back. I think also the culture that is informed by certain religions, obedience is core. Obedience of authority or a senior figure is core to it, and that way you do not have a voice growing up. You are a listener and you just listen and do, and so that feedback loop and developing the confidence for someone to have their own thoughts and to speak their own thoughts barely exists till at a certain age. But also I think, and this is out of my own lived experience, what happens is that suppression of voice, that when you're suppressed and you do not have a voice till a certain age, when you get to the position of seniority, the way you relate, that the power dynamic is always skewed, such that also you grew up in a culture where you don't listen or you're not listened to. When you get there, chances are very high that you will also not listen, and you will not identify that as a problem. And I think that is a loop that goes back and forth. I am a good student, I get trained, I become a teacher, and chances of me listening to my students or creating that palatable ecosystem where everybody can speak out their minds, while at the same time there is a certain level of respect both ways. It is barely non-existent, and and I had never thought about it until this conversation, and I think it's quite revealing.
It's and many things are changing. So, for example, at SSLA, the classrooms that we have, most of my students are not. They question and they ask things, and they're ready to discuss. Right? Not everybody, maybe, and maybe in comparison, maybe there are fewer people who do that. I don't know. But it's definitely different, right? And that makes it so much more exciting to teach a class here.
Exactly.
And not just about, I think, the teacher-student relationship and how that plays out, but in general, what you said about workspaces. So even for teachers outside of the classroom, or what you can bring into the classroom is also based on your workspace, right? And how the faculty space is set, or how the university, what sort of atmosphere the university creates or the college creates.
Yes.
Right? So one thing that I really enjoy at SSLA is the academic freedom that's there to, in terms of designing courses or designing how the classes are taught and so on. And that's so important, because suppose I did not have that freedom, to then give my students, that sort of freedom in the classroom would become really, really hard, right? And I think that's happening in a lot of colleges when we have these kinds of workshops that I was talking to you about. And I just have conversations with other participants and colleagues, right? In a lot of colleges, that sort of freedom doesn't exist, right? So there are very set rules about what gets done and how things get taught, and how teachers are professionally. So and that's definitely a barrier, an obstacle to growth, both for the teacher and the student. But also, I guess, largely for whichever institution they belong to, right? So it really should be. It's kind of funny that giving people the freedom to do things is probably good overall, but it's not the path that people usually take, right?
True. Wow. Okay. Now, one of the things, especially now that you've segued into, these institutions that give teachers or create an atmosphere where a teacher can really be very artistic in the way they approach their interactions with students, be it in designing the curriculum, the session plans. But there are others where it's not the same, which is very obvious. So what has been your, I mean, and not limited to SSLA, but as a teacher, what has been your biggest challenge, in achieving your goals as, as an educator?
This is where this is the part where I need to think, and you have to cut things off and let me think, I suppose.
I would like to have this part actually. Yeah.
So I don't know if I've had that many difficulties, in the sense that things that really stand out.
Yeah.
So college teachers, school teachers are required to have a bachelor's in education or something like that. Right?
Yes.
Where there's actual training about how to teach, that sort of thing.
That is true.
College educators don't have that unless you've had experiences as as an instructor in some other capacity before, and so on.
Yeah.
So as a young college teacher, I think you tend to just learn things on the go, or listen to others, and so then having senior teachers who play a mentoring role becomes important. But just this thing that usually college teachers are just thrown into college teaching and have to figure it out. So and that is a little bit hard, I suppose. And also, the other thing has been, I guess, in a classroom, especially large classrooms.
Yeah.
And this is, I just don't know. So in a large classroom, you have students who have very different interests, very different abilities, and you have to teach the same content, and there's a time constraint.
Yeah.
Plus, it's a large class. So figuring out how to take everybody along, right? So it was somebody, I think, from your class, or somebody from a junior class who said, teachers pay attention to the tail ends, right? So either the students who are doing extremely well, or students who are struggling, right? But there's a bunch of us in the middle who, nobody seems to worry about it.
Yeah.
So the student was joking, but I think there is some truth to it, that
true.
Figuring out how to make sure that that you don't lose anybody. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that's too steep a hill to climb. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't have that goal, and some students will like some classes and not like others, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I've always worried a little bit about losing people in a class, so that's a little bit of a
but have you ever gone to a classroom and felt petrified, like
petrified?
Yeah.
So this is, I don't know whether this will ever go away. Before every class, I have butterflies in my stomach, right? Because you have to take this thing to the students and make sure that they sort of come along with you, right? And that's always I always feel nervous just before a class. There's a build up of, I don't know, some energy or something that comes with, it's a little bit of nervousness.
That is
right?
true.
Being petrified, especially the first time you teach a specific course, it gets better with iterations of a course, right? But so it is a scary experience to go put yourself out there in front of all of these students. And and there is the responsibility of talking to them about this, getting them to respond, making sure that it's a good learning environment for them. So I don't think the sort of the weight of that responsibility sits lightly. And it definitely comes with some nervousness. Always, I think. So I don't know, you should ask seasoned teachers if it ever goes away.
You're quite seasoned, isn't it? I mean, you've been in the field for how many years now?
So, well, as of in a full-time teaching position, it's been the last 3 years, right?
Okay, lovely.
And then 2 years before that, in 2 different institutions, I was guest faculty. And then the years as a teaching assistant.
Lovely.
Right? So it's those.
So how do you go about, and this I think most of us, the students, would really like to know, because we do not see what happens in the backstage of a teacher's life. We only see them performing.
It is, that's the word, right? It's like a performance. And so I'm sure performers would tell you, right? Every time you go on, there is something that builds up, right?
So we only see that. But what really happens behind the scenes? How do you plan? How do you go about planning your session plans?
Yeah.
How do you set your goals as a teacher? And how do you deal with students performing maybe really well or not according to your expectations?
Okay. I don't know if I'll address all aspects
of it, but let's go with it.
So with so the good thing about teaching is that people have been doing this for centuries.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of knowledge that, like collective knowledge that you can draw upon, right? So the people have come before you who've taught these ideas, right? And many teachers, I think, are extremely giving, in the sense of, if you just go online and look for a community of teachers, you can be sure that somewhere in the world somebody's taken the time to talk about how they teach and what they used to teach and so on. So apart from just the standard thing of, okay, you are a person who's been trained in the discipline, and so you know what the sub modules are and everything, but I also spend some time before the semester begins also looking at just what the teachers community is saying about teaching these specific ideas, right? Be it people I know personally or just random people online, and what resources are available. So first is, I guess, just chalking that out and collecting resources and so on. Then comes the studying, right? So you do as much studying or more than your students do before you teach the course. So there's just sitting with, so if it's physics or math, there's just sitting with the material, working through things, working through problems, setting up assignments that you work through yourself. There's all of that. And then there's the nerve-wracking, how many ever hours, if you teach a 2-hour class, there's likely 2 to 3 hours or even more than that of prep for every one of those classes that you have to teach, where you make your notes, think through the material. It's not always possible to make nice notes. Then you're just thinking on the go, saying, okay, I'm going to do this, say this, right? So I don't know, is that what you wanted to know?
Exactly. I want to know that. I want to know that, and what goes after that, because now you are in front of us performing. And you have students who are, as you said, you have different categories of students who are really good at a specific subject. Some of us who actually I'm not in that category yet, but there are those ones in the middle who are always singing, and then there is me and my other people at the back there who probably are not understanding what's happening in the class. How do you, as an educator, and I think this is one of the toughest things, try to carry all your students along? And I would like to know, because one is, and I would like to connect this with one of the biggest challenges a lot of teachers in Kenya have spoken about, is that the strength of their classroom is really big. You find one teacher dealing with 40 to 50 students every day. And so you have that, wide variety of students in the classroom. How do you take them together?
So again, I don't know if I've managed to do that, but I'll tell you what I try to do. So one is, there's all of this planning that happens before, but so flexibility is important in the classroom, right? Okay, fine. So you've planned all of this, but something might happen in the classroom that derails your plans, or you have to say things slightly differently, or adapt, or turn to something else which you hadn't quite planned for, because it's in response to what the student said, and irrespective of who the student is who said this, right? So that helps, which is being able to pivot and do something slightly differently, or make sure that you incorporate whatever is being said into whatever you're teaching. Right? So that's one thing to do. The other is, at least I try to make sure that I've asked students, almost every student in the class, to respond at some point or the other. It's hard for really large classes, and that's why, again, when we went online in the last year and a half, it became much harder to do that. Right? But sort of asking, not do you have any question, but what are your questions? Right? So, and getting them to, it need not be something profound that somebody has to ask, but some way for them to be a part of the conversation that's going on, right? So I think I do a little bit of this back and forth of asking, oh, yes, do you get this? But most of the time it's not sufficient to ask, do you get it? Because somebody likely say, yes, I get it, I understand, right? So then you pose a question that helps you figure out whether they've understood, right?
True.
Which is about whatever it is that you're teaching. So you ask a conceptual question or something that you make sure they try and respond to, and try and make sure that there isn't too much judgment around that answer in terms of how can you say this, right? So you try and avoid that as much as possible. Once in a while you have to say that because it's important to do the work also, and sometimes when students don't do the work, you have to sort of make it clear that it's important to do the work, put the hours, figure this out for yourself.
Sure.
But yes, generally make it a fairly non-judgmental space, I suppose.
I think, which is really interesting what you mentioned, and I like the trajectory we are heading towards, is the online classes and the challenges that came with it. And I remember most of us as students, we really spoke a lot about our mental health and how we are not able to deal with the classes, which is actually a reality. But what was never spoken about or hardly spoken about was teachers' mental health and teachers' well-being. Now, what are some of the major challenges you faced, especially during COVID? And how did you go about them?
Okay, so of course, I can only speak to what I experienced, which, and it wasn't discomfort, as much of a discomfort as it was for several other educators. So I must say that right away.
Yeah, sure.
So things were fairly easy for me switching to an online space. It wasn't the case for most people, right?
That is true.
But it was just a very exhausting experience, right? So this sudden loss of feedback, and I think every teacher will tell you this, that there was this loss of feedback, especially with the large classes. So with the small classes, so I have classes that are as small as 4 people, right? And that was okay because you could individually sort of keep checking on students. But there was suddenly this loss of feedback, especially from large classes where you couldn't see people, you couldn't see body language. So that was hard. Secondly, a lot of the engagement you have with students also comes from just corridor conversation. So somebody being able to run to you and ask something or say something, right?
Yes.
So all of that was gone. I think many teachers also who weren't used to the online space, or that was hard, I think, on most people. It was fairly easy if we had already been using this space. So that wasn't as hard for me. These are some things that immediately come to mind, right? Like just the loss of one reason I like being in the classroom is because I get to meet all of these wonderful people, right? And there's a new cohort, and you get to know about other people, and there's and those conversations are really nice. So the loss of that was quite difficult, but also this feedback, right? The feedback of most students went silent, and understandably so sometimes, because in a class of 150 you're very aware. So when you're just sitting in a space, you feel that everything else will drown you out a little bit.
True.
But when you're just there 2D and there's going to be that focus on you, many students understandably, I think, feel that don't feel as comfortable speaking up.
Yeah, that is true.
So I developed this habit over the last 1.5 years. I was telling my students, so constantly going it's very annoying because you're trying to get feedback, but it's so that I think was quite hard.
And what was your biggest takeaway from this whole COVID experience now that we are almost out of it? Fingers crossed.
One was so but at the same time that groups of people, educators, students, everybody came together to try and see how you can continue to, how learning can continue in these spaces and so on. So one is just that, when groups of people come together, you can figure things out, right?
Exactly,
so it's okay,
exactly,
you know, you
exactly.
can figure out a lot of things. Secondly, I think just, let me see, what else? Yeah, maybe just that I miss the physical classroom a little too much. Yeah. But also, this is strange to say, and it comes from maybe like the privilege of having a space to yourself.
Yes.
Right? So suddenly when you had to, you know, sort of go home and, you know, just teach from home, it also meant that I had a lot more space for myself in terms of just like quietness also. Yeah. So if you're in a really busy space,
that
right,
is true.
you have to quickly switch between things and there's constant buzz.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to have a room of your own.
That is
right?
true.
And having that immediately meant that, you know, you could think for longer periods of time at a stretch or something like that. So yeah.
I remember having this conversation with Anita in her office, and she says, most people do not really understand the challenges that some of the teachers are facing, because especially she was speaking about you know, female educators. Women have so much challenge because at this point of time they're still in the same room. They have to be mothers, they have to be wives, they have to be educators, and sometimes daughters-in-law, and you have to juggle with all that at the same time. And I think it was one of the toughest experiences, because you know, with school you have that chance to come out of it and live a different experience altogether, and then go back. But that time, you know, the way she explained, I think, you know, I really got to have at least a snapshot.
No, definitely, you know? and there are this is exactly true, right? And it had so some educators were like me, were luckier than others in not having a lot of those things to take care of, right? But it was extremely difficult for a lot of teachers, and I think there were a bunch of news stories that came out at the time talking about, oh, you know, how somebody was doing this and that, and sort of, you know, saying, that, oh wow, right? But it's more than, oh wow, you know, how can you expect a person to do all of this, right? Like why aren't people making it easier for the person? But that's true. That like I said, right, that's not an experience that I personally had. But it is one that several educators had, right? And also being able to, okay, so here's the other thing, right? So which is even with students, right? You didn't know under what conditions the student was operating, studying, right? And again, this has huge variation depending on which part of the country you're from, what kind of school you go to, all of this. Right? Issues of access also are very different for SSLA versus other spaces.
True, very true.
But even then, you didn't know where your student was coming from, right? So a lot of your usual responses may not have been the best for, you know, this space, right? Because you just don't know the conditions anymore, and it was very hard to know what to do sometimes. So in a regular situation, if a student is, you know, not doing well, you can push people a little bit more.
Yes.
But it's not very clear. It wasn't very clear in the last 1.5 years how much to push a student, or was it okay to sort of pull somebody up for you know, something, or so again, I think that a lot of what we're saying hinges on feedback of various kinds.
I think one of the things that I was having this conversation with a couple of students, and what they say is I personally might have not been, you know, a victim of something due to lack of better word, but we got to see a lot of things that we never knew exist. You know, you see your parents going through a tough time because of COVID, you know, that financial press, you know, you see that argument and how it impacts the whole atmosphere because all of you are locked in the same room, and that really affects your capacity to, you know, be a student at the same time, because the amount of emotional baggage that is put on top of you is just too much. And at the same time, you know, so I think we have learned so much out of this. I remember this time Anita sent me this video. Anita and I keep talking a lot. So she sent me this video by Obama when he was talking about the power of communities, because most of us made it through COVID because of having those communities that support us. And you know, you have those conversations happening, you have a lot of, you know, people really showing interest to your well-being, you know, and in your you know, just to survive through this experience. And I think we are very lucky to be, you know, here today, and also to be here with you, you know. But now moving on and almost coming to an end, you know. What do you want to say?
I was going to say that I think young people felt the burden of this a lot more, right? So because suddenly it felt that they should be doing something to help, and there, in many cases, there weren't things you could do. There were things you could do, and there were things you couldn't do, right? Then there was the uncertainty of, you know, college is supposed to be such a lovely time in your lives, right? And not being able to be with friends, or the uncertainty of what happens now. So I think there was a lot of disillusionment around that as well, which was...
it was really sad actually for young people like us. I mean, I'm not the youngest in the room, but in my classroom I think I'm the oldest, almost older than some of my teachers, by the way. So I think there was this whole social media, because social media became a new whole big world for us to live in. And there's that pressure where a lot of people are doing so many things. People are working out in the house, people are doing this. And that really built up a lot of social pressure. You know, I mean, so much was happening in our heads. And for sure, most of us are not really experienced in how to deal with these situations altogether. So that really but it's amounted, and I think what has happened is that we've come out of it really strong. You know, as a people, I mean, we've gone through a pandemic for 2 years, and I think I am not the same person I was in 2020 March when it happened. So it's a good thing, and it's been a challenge for everyone. But now coming back and almost coming to an end of this, now that we are all preparing and waiting for January to happen, Omicron, please go away. What are the things that you're looking up to as an educator, going back to a class with students, with you know, right in front of you, with feedback, right in front of you, you know, that live experience? What are the things that you're really looking up to?
For so for classroom experiences, definitely, right? Just going back to the classroom, right? But also some of the things that we, you know, over the last 2 years, we've picked up practices, ideas, things that can easily be taken to the physical space as well, right? So taking some of that there, but also in terms of how we worked with students and other teachers, taking into account their situations, right? The social situations. So we paid a lot more attention in the last 2 years to how people are doing outside of the classroom. Right? And it was, I mean, we were thinking of it in the context of the pandemic, but we did pay attention to people's lives outside of the classroom. And did things in the classroom, and you know, in order to take that into account as much as we could. Right? And there's no reason for that not to continue. Right? So because I think that should always be the case, that you think of where people are coming from and what are their difficulties outside of the classroom to inform some of your practices in the classroom. Right? But also, I guess, just grow as a teacher. Grow as a teacher, because I don't think people, you know, just like for the ideal student, there are words that people think of. But when people think of a teacher and think of all the maybe adjectives associated with a teacher, they probably don't think of a teacher as being an ambitious person or having ambitions, right? Ambitions, I don't mean it in a, you know, sort of world domination kind of way, but just being, so I think I'm a fairly ambitious person, right? So I want to do things bigger, better, have more opportunities for self-growth, have more opportunities for my students to be ambitious in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So hopefully just have more opportunities to do that.
And just to end this, how would you define your ideal students for the SSLA students who are watching this?
Oh no, that's no, just somebody who's willing to put in the work to learn something, somebody who's curious, who's ready to ask questions, who's ready to engage in a discussion, who's ready to acknowledge other people, including teachers and students, and somebody, I think, who has just a general interest in life outside of what they're studying as well, right? Because that also informs how they are as a student. So you should just have like general curiosity for life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumithra. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much, Peter. I don't know how much editing you have to do, but this was great. Yeah,
it wasn't awkward.
Thank you. Huh?
It was not awkward at all.
It was not.
Yeah.
But I think all of the bits where I was like,